The crystal glasses were clinking, and 50 guests were raising a toast to my parents' 35th wedding anniversary in the dining room of the home I had fully paid for. My mother tapped her glass, smiled brightly at the crowd, and handed me a thick legal envelope wrapped in a silk ribbon. "A little gift of unity for our family," she declared into the microphone. But when I slid the papers out, my heart stopped. It was a quick claim deed transferring sole ownership of my 4-bedroom home to my golden child brother Jason, who hadn't held a stable job in 6 years. When I whispered that this was insane, my mother leaned in, her smile never fading, and hissed, "Your brother has done more for this family's pride than you ever could. Sign it or you're dead to us." My name is Coraline. I'm 34 years old, and if working as a corporate accountant for over a decade has taught me anything, it's that numbers don't lie, people do. While my friends were spending their 20s travelling and splurging on dynamic lifestyles, I lived frugally, tracked every single penny, and invested every bit of my savings into building a secure future. Growing up, my family had a very specific dynamic. My younger brother Jason was the golden child who could do no wrong. If Jason scraped through high school with barely passing grades, my parents threw him a party. If he quit his 3rd job in 6 months because he didn't like waking up early, they called him ambitious and misunderstood. Meanwhile, my promotions, my endless work hours, and my financial stability were treated as baseline expectations. I was the reliable iron pillar, while Jason was the fragile glass vase they spent their entire lives protecting. 5 years ago, when my parents were facing rising rent prices and struggling to manage on their modest retirement savings, I stepped in to do what I thought a good daughter should do. I purchased a spacious 4-bedroom house in a quiet suburban neighbourhood. I put down 20% of my own hard-earned cash and took on the mortgage completely under my own name. We had a clear verbal agreement. My parents could live there rent-free to preserve their nest egg, as long as they covered basic utilities and maintained the property. Jason predictably moved into the guest house out back shortly after treating it like his personal free resort, while he figured out his next big business venture. I thought I was providing stability for my family. I had no idea I was actually funding my own betrayal. By the time my parents' 35th wedding anniversary rolled around, I decided to pull out all the stops. I spent thousands of dollars organising a grand celebration right at the house. I hired high-end caterers, set up elegant outdoor lighting, and invited over 50 guests including extended family, long-time family friends, and my parents' neighbours. I wanted to give them an unforgettable night to celebrate their milestone. I was standing near the buffet table when my mother tapped her crystal glass with a spoon, drawing the entire room's attention. She gave a heartwarming speech about family, resilience, and legacy. Then her eyes landed on me with a bright, calculated smile. She pulled a thick legal envelope wrapped in a silk ribbon from her purse and walked toward me. "Coraline, dear, as a gesture of true unity for our family's future, we have a small formality for you to sign," she announced into the microphone. I unribboned the envelope, assuming it was a photo memory book or a sentimental tribute. Instead, my eyes scanned the bold title at the top, Quick Claim Deed. It was a document legally transferring sole ownership of my house directly to Jason. My jaw dropped. I looked up and whispered frantically, "Mom, are you insane? I paid for this house." Her smile never slipped, but her eyes turned pitch black. She leaned into my ear, her voice dripping with venom. "You don't need a 4-bedroom house, Coraline. Jason needs security to launch his life. Your brother has done more for this family's pride than you ever could. Sign the deed by next week or we will tell everyone at this party you're stealing from us and you're dead to this family." I left the party early, my mind racing as the hum of conversation faded into a chilling realisation. Why now? Why force a sudden desperate title transfer in front of 50 people after 5 years of peaceful coexistence? Something did not add up, and as an accountant, when numbers or behaviours don't make sense, I audit. The next day, while my parents and Jason were out, I visited the house under the pretense of collecting leftover party decorations. Instead, I went straight to the home office where the family mail was sorted. Digging through a stack of unopened envelopes addressed to Jason, I found urgent notices from 3 different lending agencies, 2 collection firms, and a high-risk commercial loan broker. The reality hit me like a bucket of ice water. Jason wasn't just struggling, he was drowning in over $80,000 of high interest. Personal debt and failed speculative investments. Worse, tucked inside a folder on my father's desk was a draft for a secondary mortgage application. Jason's plan wasn't just to live in my house. He intended to use my property as collateral for a $150,000 business loan to launch another doomed venture, risking the entire roof over our heads. But the final blow was finding a series of handwritten notes between my mother and Jason's financial advisor. She wasn't an innocent bystander being fooled by her son. My mother knew about every single cent of his debt. She had actively conspired with him to trick me into handing over the title, fully aware that if his business failed, the bank would foreclose on the house I spent my entire youth grinding to buy. She was willing to sacrifice my financial life to shield her golden child from the consequences of his own reckless choices. 3 days later, I returned to the house to retrieve the rest of my personal belongings. My mother met me in the hallway, crossing her arms with an arrogant smirk, convinced her public ambush had broken my spirit. "Have you brought the signed papers, Coraline?" she asked coldly. When I told her I would never hand over the keys to my hard-earned life, she exploded. She stood inches from my face, shouting the exact words that severed whatever affection I had left for her. "Your brother has done more for this family than you ever could. You're just a selfish, bean-counting parasite who is hoarding assets she doesn't need." I didn't yell back. I didn't cry. Instead, a cold, serene clarity washed over me. For years, I had operated out of filial duty, believing I was protecting my parents. But duty ends where betrayal begins. They believed that because they lived in the house, they held power over it. What they forgot was that my name was the only one on the deed, and my parents were legally living there under a month-to-month lease agreement I had wisely drafted 5 years ago. Instead of engaging in a drawn-out, exhausting court fight over tenancy, I made a swift, strategic pivot. That very afternoon, I called a major real estate investment group specializing in cash transactions. I listed the property at 10% below market value for an immediate, hassle-free sale. Within 48 hours, an investor inspected the exterior, verified the title, and signed a binding purchase contract. Cash closing was set for 2 weeks out, completely behind my family's back. They wanted my house so badly. Now they could watch someone else buy it. On the exact day of the 7-day deadline my mother had arrogantly set, I walked into the house with a manila folder in my hand. My mother and Jason were sitting at the dining room table, sipping coffee with triumphant smiles, fully expecting me to hand over the signed quitclaim deed. "I knew you'd come to your senses, Coraline," my mother said, holding out her hand expectantly. Instead of the deed, I slid 2 legal documents across the table. One was a formal 30-day notice to vacate, legally ordering them and Jason off the property. The second was a copy of the executed cash sale agreement showing the house had been sold to an institutional real estate buyer. The colour drained from my mother's face as she read the bold text at the top of the eviction notice. Jason grabbed the sales contract, his eyes bulging as he stammered, You sold the house. What about my business loan? What about my collateral?" "You don't have any collateral, Jason, because you don't own anything," I said calmly, "and you never will on my dime." Panicked, my mother stood up, her voice trembling as her arrogant facade shattered into pieces. "Coraline, you can't do this to your own flesh and blood. Where are we supposed to go? We're your parents. You had a rent-free home and my complete devotion," I replied, standing my ground. "But you chose to plot against me with a son who ruined himself. Now you can rely on him to buy you your next house." Over the next 3 weeks, chaos erupted. My mother tried begging, crying, and sending relatives to guilt-trip me into cancelling the sale, but the contract was legally binding. Jason's creditors, sensing he had no assets to secure his debts, began relentlessly pursuing him, turning his life into a nightmare of constant collections. The closing went smoothly, without a single hitch. On the 30th day, I handed over the keys to the new owner and walked away with my full equity payout. Over $350,000 sitting securely in my bank account. I immediately packed up my life, moved to a high-rise apartment in a neighbouring city, and changed my phone number, leaving only a dedicated email address for necessary communications. Without my property to leverage as collateral, Jason's entire financial structure collapsed like a house of cards. His creditors swooped in, freezing his business accounts and threatening legal action for his unpaid personal loans. Realising he couldn't hide behind our family anymore, he was forced to take a low-paying night shift job just to make minimum debt payments, his grand dreams of becoming an overnight entrepreneur completely shattered. My parents were hit with a harsh reality check. Deprived of the luxury 4-bedroom home they had taken for granted, they were forced to downsize into a modest 2-bedroom apartment. For the first time in over a decade, they had to manage their own living expenses strictly within the limits of their modest retirement pensions. unable to rely on my financial cushion whenever unexpected bills arose. The ultimate irony was watching the family dynamic completely invert. My mother, who had spent decades boasting about her golden boy, was forced to accept that Jason couldn't even support himself, let alone take care of them in their old age. Whenever she sent emails crying about how hard life had become, I kept my responses brief, polite, and completely detached. The power dynamic had permanently shifted. They finally understood that I was never just an endless cash stream to be exploited. I was the only person keeping their lives afloat. Reclaiming my financial independence was about far more than just protecting my bank account. It was about reclaiming my self-worth and peace of mind. For years, I had allowed guilt and toxic family expectations to dictate my choices, mistaking sacrifice for love. Stepping away from that cycle allowed me to build a life defined by genuine freedom, where my success is celebrated rather than exploited. I learned the hard way that blood doesn't give anyone a free pass to disrespect your boundaries or ruin your hard-earned accomplishments. Setting hard boundaries with people who treat you like a resource isn't selfish, it's self-preservation. Today, I live in a beautiful home where I feel safe, respected, and completely in control of my own future. I no longer carry the weight of trying to fix a family that was comfortable using me to enable someone else's failures. If you were put in my shoes and publicly ambushed by your own family, how would you have handled it? Would you have fought back immediately, or would you have executed a quiet plan like I did? Drop a comment below and let me know your thoughts. I'd love to read your stories. If this video resonated with you, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more stories like this. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.